Paper houses. The sun was too bright, but the speeches dragged on anyway. Donald Mercer shifted his weight on the aluminum bleachers, arms folded, one boot tapping the metal rhythmically. The high school band had long since packed up their instruments, but the ceremony lingered, each name called, each cheer rising in waves from the crowd. Families fanned themselves with programs. Cell phones hovered like periscopes. Donald kept his down. And next, Adam Walker, graduating with honors. The cheer that followed was sharp, almost rehearsed. Beth stood 3 rows ahead, clapping with measured enthusiasm, her sundress crisp despite the heat. Donald didn't move. Adam strode across the stage, tall and easy in his borrowed confidence. He took the diploma, turned to the microphone, and smiled wide for the cameras. "Thanks to everyone who helped me get here," Adam said. "My teachers, my friends, my mom, and of course, my real dad who always believed in me." There was a pause. Donald felt it in his chest before he heard it in the crowd. "And shout out to the ATM," Adam added with a smirk. "Wouldn't have made it without you, big guy." Laughter rippled. A few scattered claps. The principal gave a tight smile. Beth's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn. Donald didn't blink. He just kept looking at the boy on stage, who had already turned to pose for photos with his diploma held high. The rest of the ceremony blurred. Someone's name was mispronounced. Balloons tangled in the bleachers. A toddler wailed behind him, but Donald sat still, his expression unreadable, until the last of the mortar boards hit the grass and the crowd surged toward the field. He didn't join them. Instead, he walked slowly back to the parking lot, bypassing the clusters of families with their floral leis and oversized cards. A woman from the neighborhood waved at him. He didn't see her. Inside the cab of his truck, the leather seat burned through his jeans. He sat with the engine off, hands on the wheel, sweat soaking the back of his shirt. The word ATM repeated in his head, not loud, not sharp, just steady, like a hammer tapping nails in a frame. When he finally turned the key, the radio came on mid-commercial. He shut it off. At home, the house was quiet. Beth wasn't back yet, probably still taking pictures with Adam and the Walkers, Adam's real dad included. Donald walked through the kitchen without turning on the light, down the basement steps that creaked in the middle like always, and stood for a moment in the cool, still dark. The basement smelled like concrete and old paint. He flipped on the overhead bulb and crossed to the filing cabinet in the corner. The third drawer stuck slightly had for years, but he knew the angle. Inside were the envelopes, neatly labeled: taxes, insurance, college. He pulled the last one, opened it, and took out the sealed cashier's check. The envelope was thick, the paper crisp. His name was nowhere on it, just the payee, County College Bursar's office. The memo line read, "Fall semester tuition, A. Walker." He held it in his hand for a long time. He'd picked it up 2 weeks ago, made the appointment at the bank like he always did. Got there early, wore his cleanest work shirt. The woman behind the desk had recognized him from the last 3 times. She smiled like it was a tradition. He had smiled back. Now, under the pull chain light, the check looked foreign, like something he'd found in someone else's house. Donald set it on the workbench. Then he opened the desk drawer next to it and pulled out a small notepad. He flipped to a blank page, wrote Plan B at the top, and underlined it once. Then he opened the laptop that sat dormant beneath a dust cover, woke it up, and clicked into the scheduled transfers. The tuition transfer set for the end of June was still pending. He canceled it. The computer asked if he was sure. He clicked yes. Then he folded the notepad page, slid it into the envelope with the check, and locked it back in the filing cabinet. The key went into the coffee can on the shelf marked "Spare Screws." Upstairs, the front door opened. Beth's voice drifted in, bright and careful. "No, I'm just dropping off the ice chest. I'll meet you back at the Walkers. You've got the keys, right? Okay. Love you, sweetie." The door shut. Her heels clicked across the kitchen tile. She stopped at the top of the basement stairs, but didn't come down. "Donald," she called. He didn't answer. "Just wanted to say, Adam's going to post the video later. Thought you might want to see it. It came out really nice." He still didn't answer. The basement light hummed. After a moment, her footsteps moved away. He waited until he heard the garage door open and close again. Then he sat down on the old wooden stool by the workbench, the same one he'd used when assembling Adam's first bike. He remembered sanding the seat post so it wouldn't stick, remembered Beth bringing down lemonade, and Adam running circles in the yard above. He looked at the envelope again, the folded note inside, the canceled transfer. It wasn't rage. Rage would have been easier. It was something colder, like waking up and realizing a house you built had hollow walls, that the studs were never anchored and you just never noticed. He picked up a pencil and started listing numbers on the notepad. Tuition, room and board, fees, books. He wrote slowly, methodically, like he was drawing up plans for a new foundation, one that wouldn't rot from the inside. He drew a box around the total. Then he sat back and stared at it. The room was silent except for the low whir of the dehumidifier. Above him, the house he'd paid for stood quiet and intact, but it felt for the first time like it belonged to someone else, counting the costs. The next morning, Donald woke early, not out of habit, but because his mind wouldn't stop running the math. He brewed coffee in silence, the pot gurgling into the hush of the kitchen. No radio, no news. Just the tick of the wall clock and the faint sound of birds beyond the window. He carried his mug to the small home office off the dining room. It still smelled faintly of sawdust from the shelving he'd built years ago, back when Adam was in middle school and wanted a space for school projects. The desk was clean, save for the laptop, a stack of tax folders, and the old spreadsheet binder he hadn't opened since refinancing the house. He flipped it open, found the tab marked Education, and began entering numbers. The cashier's check amount. What had already been spent on applications, test prep, laptop, orientation. He subtracted what he'd already paid and highlighted the remainder in yellow. Then he opened a new tab and labeled it Alternative Allocation. He didn't write Joy's name, not yet. Just a list of requirements: tuition, housing, books, meal plan. Then a second list: legal structure, donor anonymity, disbursement schedule. He made a note to call Linda from the bursar's office on Monday. She'd helped him once when Adam's AP credits didn't transfer properly. She'd remember him, or at least remember he didn't like being talked down to. He saved the file under a new name and closed the laptop. The sun was higher now, slanting through the blinds. He glanced at the mantel as he passed through the living room. A row of framed photos stared back. Adam in cap and gown, Adam at prom, Adam at the science fair, with that medal Donald had driven 3 hours to see awarded. In the middle sat a picture from last summer. Adam and Carl Reeves grinning in front of Carl's lake house, both holding red Solo cups and looking proud of nothing in particular. Donald picked it up. The frame was heavy, faux bronze, a gift from Beth, probably. He carried it to the garage, set it on the workbench, and pried open the back. The photo slid out. He held it in his hand for a moment, then tore it cleanly in half, right between the two grins. The frame went into the donation box by the door, the photo halves into the trash. Later that afternoon, he walked next door with a container of coleslaw under one arm and a 6-pack of the cheap beer Carl liked under the other. The Walkers' backyard was already crowded folding chairs in a loose circle, a grill smoking near the fence, and Beth in a linen blouse moving between guests with her hostess smile turned on full. "Don!" Carl boomed, raising a tongs-wielding hand like a preacher at a revival. "Man of the hour! Get over here!" Donald gave a nod and handed off the beer. Carl cracked one open and offered it back, but Donald shook his head. "Suit yourself," Carl said, already turning to the next person. "Did you see the video yet?" Adam nailed it. Got like 2,000 views overnight. Donald didn't answer. He moved toward the food table, set down the coleslaw, and poured himself a glass of water. From across the yard, he watched Adam holding court near the fire pit, retelling the graduation speech with dramatic hand gestures. "And then I said, 'Thanks to my real dad, you know,'" Adam was saying, laughing. And the crowd went nuts. I mean, people were clapping. Total mic drop moment. Someone asked about the ATM comment. Adam grinned, unbothered. "Yeah, I mean, look, I'm grateful and all, but facts are facts, right? He's always been more of a financial presence, like, we never really connected emotionally. It's not personal." Donald turned away before he could hear the rest. Beth approached a few minutes later, wine glass in hand. "You didn't have to bring anything, you know. Carl always overbuys." Donald shrugged. "Figured someone might want it." She glanced down at the coleslaw, then back at him. Adam was just telling the story again. The speech. People really responded to it. "I noticed." He didn't mean it as a dig. she added quickly. He was just in the moment. You know how he gets. Donald didn't reply. He took a sip of water and looked past her, toward the back fence where the hydrangeas were starting to bloom. Beth followed his gaze, misreading the silence. He's got a good heart, Don. He's just performing a little. That's how kids are now. Everything's a story for the feed. He nodded once, slowly. Right? Beth hesitated, then touched his arm lightly. Don't let it eat at you. You've always done right by him. Everyone knows that. He looked down at her hand, then back up at her. Do they? She blinked. What? Know that? Beth's smile faltered. Of course. I mean, Carl does. And everyone here. You've always been generous. He gave a small, dry smile. Generous? That's one word for it. Beth opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked away. I should check on the burgers. He watched her go. The glass in his hand felt suddenly heavy. He set it down on the corner of the table and walked home without saying goodbye. That night, in the quiet of the garage, he opened the laptop again. The spreadsheet glowed in the dark like a blueprint. He added a column for disbursement timing, semester by semester, with tuition and housing front-loaded. Then he started drafting language for the trust. He wasn't a lawyer, but he knew how to write specs. He knew how to be clear. He wrote, beneficiary must be admitted to and enrolled in an accredited 4-year institution. He wrote, funds to be distributed directly to the institution on behalf of the beneficiary. He wrote, donor to remain anonymous, no contact required or expected. He paused, then added one more line. This is not a reward, it is a repair. He saved the file again and leaned back. The house was quiet. Upstairs, Beth moved around closing drawers, brushing teeth. The soft sound of her slippers on the hardwood. They hadn't spoken since the barbecue. Donald sat in the dark until the laptop screen dimmed. He wasn't angry anymore. He was building something. Something that wouldn't rot. Something that didn't need applause. Finding the right hands. The woman at the admissions desk wore glasses on a chain and a cardigan with tiny embroidered birds on the collar. She looked up when Donald stepped through the double doors of the community college's administration building, her expression politely blank until he asked for someone in admissions. Linda's in, she said, gesturing down the hallway. Second door on the left. You can go on back. Donald nodded his thanks and walked slowly, his boots soft against the institutional linoleum. He passed a bulletin board covered in flyers, tutoring hours, transfer deadlines, a poetry reading in the library next Thursday. The hall smelled faintly of copier toner and vending machine coffee. Linda's office was small, cluttered in the way of someone who knew exactly where everything was. A diploma hung above a filing cabinet, and a ceramic mug full of pens rested beside a desktop monitor with a cracked corner. She looked up when he knocked lightly on the doorframe. Hi, she said, straightening. Can I help you? I'm not a student, Donald said, but I was hoping to ask about one. She tilted her head. Okay. Are you family? No, just someone who heard her story. Joy Malik. Linda blinked once, then leaned back in her chair. May I ask what this is regarding? I'm looking to establish a scholarship, Donald said. Privately, anonymously. I'm not trying to make a fuss, but I want to be sure it goes to someone with grit, not just grades, someone who's earned it. Linda studied him a moment longer, then nodded slowly. Well, Mr. Mercer, Donald Mercer. Well, Mr. Mercer, I can't share everything in a student's file, but I can tell you what's public, and if you want to leave something for her, I can pass it along. That's fine. She tapped at her keyboard and pulled up a screen. Joy's a standout, she said. Top 2%, math and biology, works part-time at the library, took extra credits to finish her associates early. Donald nodded once. She applying out? Accepted to state, pre-med track, but... Linda hesitated, then sighed. Financial aid didn't come through the way she hoped. Her dad's been out of work since the factory closed. They're trying to make it work, but it's tight. Donald didn't say anything. He just let the silence settle. Linda clicked again, then turned the screen slightly toward him. This is her personal statement. I probably shouldn't, but... She gave a small shrug. You strike me as someone who reads carefully. He did. Twice. It wasn't flowery. No grand sob story or polished pitch. Just a clear, steady voice that talked about late nights, library shifts, and the quiet pride of being the first in her family to make it past high school. She wrote about the way biology made her feel like the world had rules, intricate, invisible, but knowable. She wrote about watching her father's hand shake when he filled out the FAFSA and realizing how many forms felt designed to shut people out. When he finished, Donald sat back. Linda watched him. "She's the real deal," she said. "No drama, just shows up and does the work." He nodded. "That's what I needed to know." He left a sealed envelope with her, unsigned. Inside was a typed note and a cashier's check for the first semester's housing deposit, made out to the university. He'd already called the bursar's office that morning to confirm they'd accept anonymous third-party payments. Linda promised to pass it along. Outside, the sun was high and flat. He stood in the parking lot for a moment, one hand on the roof of his truck, before pulling the driver's side door open. There was a picture tucked into the visor, one of those studio shots from Sears years ago. Adam in a little sweater vest, Beth in a navy blouse, Donald with one hand on his son's shoulder. He pulled it free and looked at it for a long time. Then he slid it into the glove compartment and shut it gently. That night, in the garage, he cleared the workbench, moved the coffee tin of old screws, swiped the sawdust off with his sleeve. He laid out the draft trust documents beside a legal pad and picked up a pen. His handwriting was small, precise. He wrote the sentence again. "This is not a reward, it is a repair." Then below it, he added, "I was the patient provider." He underlined it once. Then he sat back, staring at the words, the way they held their shape without apology. Donald Mercer sat alone in the garage. Outside, the street was quiet. Inside, the hum of the beer fridge filled the space like a low, steady breath. He stared at the legal pad. That phrase patient provider sat in his chest like a weight, not a burden, a ballast. That was what he had been, for years, through the long shifts and the quiet disappointments. Through Beth's gentle edits of truth at parties, through Adam's slow drift toward performance over substance. He had carried the load, steady and unseen. And now he wasn't going to chase recognition. He was going to redirect it. The transformation wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Donald stared at the half-finished trust file. The old self-quiet, forgiving, hopeful died when Adam called him the ATM. Died when Beth looked away instead of stepping in. Died when his work, his real work, was treated like a transaction. No more waiting. No more giving the benefit of the doubt. Only one question now. Not if they paid, but how thoroughly. Something inside broke. But broken things make sharp edges. He pulled the laptop closer, created a folder, began copying over the draft documents, cross-referencing tuition schedules, mapping out payment milestones. Precision mattered, timing mattered. He didn't need applause. He needed to know that something he built, truly built, would last. Later, he printed the final note and folded it into thirds. On the outside, he wrote, "To the student who keeps showing up." No name, no signature. The next morning, he mailed it from the post office downtown. No return address. The woman behind the counter didn't even glance at him twice. As he walked back to the truck, the sun was just starting to warm the sidewalk. The town moved around him, kids heading to summer programs, a man loading mulch into the back of a pickup, the smell of donuts drifting from the bakery 2 doors down. Donald slid behind the wheel and rested his hands on the steering wheel for a moment. Then he turned the key and drove home. The photo stayed in the glove box. The trust file stayed on his desktop. And Joy Malick's name, once a line on someone else's spreadsheet, had become the blueprint for something better, something earned, something his. Paper-clipped justice. The garage smelled like oil and old pine. Donald had swept the floor that morning, a quiet ritual, pushing the dust into neat corners like he was preparing a workspace for something sacred. He'd laid everything out on the workbench folder, documents, the thick envelope from the bank, a blue pen, the old notary stamp he'd dug from the back of the filing cabinet. The cashier's check sat in the center, pristine and heavy in its implication. Payable to County College Foundation, Joy Malick Scholarship Fund. The name was typed in clean serif letters, but he'd written it by hand first, twice, on scrap paper, just to get it right. He adjusted the paperwork again, aligning the corners. It was almost meditative. Almost. The side door creaked open. "You in here?" Tom's voice, rough and familiar, echoed off the concrete. Donald didn't answer, just kept stamping, initialing, signing. Tom stepped in, boots scuffing lightly. Jesus, you're really doing it? Donald didn't look up. I told you. Tom walked closer, eyeing the spread. That's the check? Yeah. How much? Donald let the question hang, then said, Enough. Tom exhaled, slow. You got time to tear it up. Donald finally looked at him. No, I don't. You think this makes it right? Tom's voice didn't rise, but the steel in it was new. You think cutting Adam out, humiliating Beth? I'm not humiliating anyone, Donald said. I'm reallocating. Tom shook his head. That's not what this is. This is revenge, plain and simple. Donald didn't flinch. Maybe it is. They stood in the quiet for a moment, surrounded by the scent of grease and cedar, the tools on the wall lined up like silent witnesses. Tom stepped closer, put a hand on Donald's wrist, not rough, but firm. If you do this, there's no going back. You'll lose what's left. Donald looked down at Tom's hand, then back to his friend's face. What's left is already gone. They made sure of that. Tom's jaw tensed. You're not a spiteful man. No, Donald said, but I'm not a fool either. He pulled his arm free, gently, and picked up the envelope, sealed it, ran his thumb along the edge once, like closing a door. Tom watched, eyes hard. I can't be part of this. I'm not asking you to. Tom stepped back. Then I guess I'll see you around. Yeah, Donald said, voice low. See you. The door closed behind Tom with a soft click. Donald stood still for a beat, then turned off the overhead light. The envelope felt warm from his hand. He drove to the bank first. The teller was a woman in her 40s, with a neat French braid and a nameplate that read, Marlene. She didn't blink at the amount, just checked his ID, compared the signature, and handed over the final transaction slip with a practiced smile. Will there be anything else today, Mr. Mercer? No, Donald said. That's all. He walked out into the heat, the sun baking the sidewalk, and slid the receipt into his shirt pocket. The air smelled like hot asphalt and cut grass. Across the street, a teenager was setting up folding chairs outside the hardware store for some kind of sidewalk sale. At the university, he parked in the visitor lot and carried the envelope in like it weighed nothing. But it did. It held years of work, and something else, something heavier. The bursar's office was quiet, one ceiling fan spinning lazily above. A young guy with earbuds looked up from behind the desk and called someone from the back. A few minutes later, Linda appeared, the same woman he'd emailed with. Early 50s, kind eyes, a cardigan even in summer. Mr. Mercer, she said, offering her hand. You're early. Better than late, Donald said. She smiled and led him into a side office, small but neat. A bulletin board, covered with scholarship flyers and student job postings. He handed her the envelope. She opened it with care, scanning the documents, flipping through the trust paperwork and the check. This is all in order, she said after a moment. You've made it very easy on us. I tried. Would you like any acknowledgement or... No, Donald said. Anonymous. If she asks, just tell her someone noticed. Linda nodded. We'll handle it discreetly. The disbursement schedule is clear. She won't have to worry about housing or meals. You've covered more than tuition. She shouldn't have to scrape to stay, Donald said. She's doing the work. I'll make sure it's done right, Linda said. He nodded once. That was all he needed. By dusk, the town had cooled a little, though the pavement still radiated heat. Donald parked 2 blocks away from the Malik house and walked the rest. It was a modest place peeling paint on the porch rail, wind chimes made from old spoons clinking in the breeze. He slid the envelope into the mailbox. Just a note this time, handwritten on plain paper. Keep showing up. Someone noticed. He didn't sign it. As he turned to go, a light came on in the front room. He moved quickly but didn't run. He didn't want to be seen, not because he was ashamed, but because this wasn't about recognition. This was about correction. The sun was almost gone by the time he got back to the truck. He sat for a minute, hands on the wheel, then glanced at the rear view. No one had followed, no one had called. The check was gone, the trust was active, the wheels were turning now, and there was no reaching back to stop them. He drove home in silence. In the garage, the workbench sat empty, save for one thing. A single paperclip, bent out of shape, resting where the envelope had been. He picked it up and turned it between his fingers. Small, twisted, no longer useful in its original form, but sharp at the ends. When paper lies down. The first call came before breakfast. Donald let it ring. Then the second came, from a different number. He let that one go too. By the time the third rang out, he was standing at the sink, rinsing his coffee mug, watching the sun crawl across the lawn like it was measuring something. He dried the cup, set it back in its place on the shelf, and walked to the garage. The air smelled faintly of oil and cedar shavings. He didn't answer the fourth call either. At the university housing office, Adam stood in front of the counter with his duffel bag half-zipped and his phone clutched like a lifeline. "I don't understand," he said again, voice rising. "My tuition's paid. It was supposed to be paid." The clerk, a young man with a lanyard full of keys and a clipboard balanced on his hip, didn't flinch. "I'm sorry. We don't have a housing assignment under your name. Nothing's been processed through the bursar. I can't give you a key without confirmation." Adam's jaw clenched. "Can you check again? My mom said it was all handled, like, weeks ago." The clerk tapped the keyboard. "There's no payment on file, no active account, no pending disbursement. You'll need to contact the bursar's office directly." Beth was already calling. Her heels clicked across the tile floor as she stormed through the building, phone pressed tight to her ear. "I don't understand," she said sharply. "You told me the final check had been processed. He starts classes next week. We've received no notification. Yes, I know about the portal, but we were assured." She paused, eyes darting toward Adam, who was now sitting on his suitcase with his arms crossed, glaring at the floor. "No," she said finally. "I'll call you back." She hung up and looked at her son. "We're going to fix this." "Mom, they won't even let me in the dorm," his voice cracked. "They said I don't exist in the system." "You do exist," she snapped. "This is a clerical error. I'll get it sorted." But her face was pale. Her fingers trembled slightly as she scrolled through her messages, searching for something solid in email, a receipt, a confirmation. Nothing. No trace of the final transfer. No confirmation from Donald. She hadn't followed up. She'd assumed. Adam's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, then hit record. He stood, squared his shoulders, and lifted the camera. "Move-in day at campus," he said with forced cheer, his voice a notch too loud. "Big moment. Can't believe I'm finally here." He panned across the lawn, other students hauling boxes, parents hugging their kids, laughter echoing off the dorm walls. Then he turned the camera on himself, all practiced grin and bright eyes. "Shout out to the fam for getting me here. Wouldn't be possible without you." He posted it before Beth could stop him. An hour later, the university sent a mass notice to housing applicants, a reminder to finalize tuition payments or risk forfeiting dorm placement. Someone tagged Adam in the comments. "Isn't this your move-in day? But you said you were already in." His video began to collect replies, a few likes, then more comments. "Wait, aren't keys handed out at check-in? Bro, this doesn't line up. Why lie?" Beth saw it happening in real time. She grabbed his arm. "Take it down." "It's fine," he said. "They'll fix it." "Adam, I'm not deleting it. I have followers. It looks bad if I backpedal." "Then don't post at all. You're not in the dorm. That's a fact." He pulled his arm away. "You told me it was covered. You said Dad sent the check." "He did," she said quickly. Then, less surely, "He said he would." Adam stared at her. "Did you actually see it?" Beth didn't answer. At home, Donald sat on the back steps with a sandwich in one hand and a small transistor radio humming an old blues station beside him. He wasn't listening to the words, just the low, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat that didn't ask questions. His phone vibrated again. He let it buzz itself out on the windowsill. Beth's voice finally arrived in person. He heard the car door slam before she reached the porch. She didn't bother knocking, just opened the screen and stood in the doorway like she owned it. She didn't, not anymore. "Where's the money, Donald?" she asked. He didn't turn. "What money?" "You know what money. The tuition. You promised Adam it was covered." "I said I'd handle it." "You didn't." "I did." Beth blinked. "What does that mean?" Donald looked at her now, slow and steady. "It means I handled it, just not the way you expected." She took a step inside. "He's stranded, Donald. No dorm, no key, no idea what happened." "You're humiliating him." "He did that himself." She flinched. "He's a kid." "He's 20. Donald said. Old enough to thank his real father in front of 500 people and call me the ATM. Beth looked away. He was nervous. It was a joke. Donald stood, finished his sandwich, and wiped his hands on a cloth. He can joke all he wants. He just doesn't get to do it on my dime anymore. Beth's voice dropped. Where did the money go? He didn't answer. You can't just vanish it. There are records. This is fraud. No, he said calmly. I closed the trust, transferred the funds, legally. It's all documented. To who? He turned off the radio. Doesn't matter. It matters to Adam. Donald leaned on the doorframe. When he decides to see people as more than extras in his highlight reel, maybe then it will. Beth's voice was brittle. You're punishing him for being young. I'm correcting a mistake, Donald said. One I made. For too long, she stared at him, eyes searching for something soft. There was nothing left to find. Outside, her phone rang. She didn't answer. By evening, Adam's video had stalled at just under 1,000 views. The comments had turned. Not aggressive, just disbelieving. A few classmates posted shots of their own key pickups. Someone posted a screenshot of the university's notice. Another circled the timestamp on Adam's post and added, "Doesn't line up." He tried to pivot posted a story about admin mix-ups and parents forgetting things. But it rang hollow. His audience wasn't massive, but it was loyal. They'd seen him brag for months about the full ride, the dorm tour, the new bedding set. Now he was staying at a motel off the highway. Beth sat across from him at the tiny table, her laptop open, fingers flying as she scoured the Bursar site, logged into every portal she could think of. Nothing. The account had been closed, the payment trail stopped cold. There was no record of pending disbursement. Adam tossed his phone onto the bed. This is a disaster. Beth didn't argue. He leaned back, covering his face. I'm not going to be able to get into any of my classes if this doesn't get sorted. Beth looked at him, then back at the screen. We'll figure something out. How? You don't have that kind of money. Silence. He lowered his hands. Do you? No, she said. Not like that. Adam stood abruptly and paced the room. He set me up. He waited until the last second and pulled the rug out. What the hell kind of person does that? Beth didn't answer. Adam turned to her, eyes wild. Did you know? No, she said. I didn't. You trusted him. So did you, she said quietly. Across town, Donald sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad in front of him. The paperclip from the garage lay beside it, still twisted. He wasn't writing, just looking. The house was quiet. No footsteps upstairs, no voices calling his name. He'd built this home one beam at a time, chosen every nail, every bracket, replaced the furnace twice, rewired the whole place after a squirrel shorted the attic line one winter. And somehow, despite all that, he'd never managed to make it feel like something permanent, just a place where things pass through. Now it was quiet in a new way, not peace, not grief, just the sound of paper settling after it's been folded too long. He picked up the paperclip and slipped it into his pocket. Adam's feed went dark the next day. No posts, no stories. Just a blank profile photo and a bio that no longer mentioned his school. The dorm room photo was gone. The pinned post thanking his ride-or-die parents had been deleted. Beth stopped calling. Donald didn't mind the silence. He had work to do. Paper houses. The sun sat heavy over the Thatcher yard, baking the lawn chairs and curling the edges of the paper plates stacked near the grill. Carl Reeves held court near the cooler, laughing too loud and sloshing beer as he retold a story no one had asked for. The Labor Day barbecue was an annual fixture. Burgers, deviled eggs, kids darting underfoot with popsicles. Normalcy, curated like a family photo. Donald stood by the fence, a cold soda sweating in his hand. He didn't mingle. He never had, really. But this year, he felt something different in the air, like the moment just before a summer storm, when the breeze dies and everything waits. Elaine Thatcher approached with her usual brisk smile. You try the baked beans? They're almost better than last year's. Donald nodded once. Not yet. She lingered, gaze flicking toward the group near the gazebo. Marta's here, brought that little cannon she likes, said she's working on a follow-up piece, something about anonymous scholarships. Donald didn't reply, but his silence stretched long enough to draw a second glance. Elaine shifted her weight. You seen the article? Ran yesterday in the county weekly. No. It's a good piece, she said, voice lowering. Girl from the maintenance crew. Her daughter got a full ride. Nobody knows who gave it, but Marta said it was all arranged quiet-like through the college, set up months ago. Donald just sipped his soda. Elaine hesitated, then added, Smart girl, apparently. Joy Malik. She's been working 2 jobs and still made honor roll. He watched the children run past in a blur of red and blue. She's the kind of kid you want to root for, Elaine said gently. Carl's voice broke through the murmur of the crowd. I mean, it's just common sense. You don't flaunt what you can't back up. That's basic. Beth was near him, wine glass in hand, her smile stretched too thin. Adam stood beside her, arms crossed, face tight. They were surrounded by neighbors now, not a crowd exactly, but a loose orbit of people pretending to talk about the potato salad while clearly eavesdropping. Donald didn't move. He didn't need to. Carl barreled on. I remember the grad party, hell. I brought the champagne. Adam was thanking everyone, and I said, That kid's going places. He chuckled. Guess not the places he thought. Beth's grip tightened on her glass. A faint crack spiderwebbed across the stem. Elaine looked away, uncomfortable. Carl, oblivious, kept going. You can't just vanish payments and expect no one to notice. That's not a glitch. That's deliberate. Beth turned toward him slowly. Carl, she said, voice calm but brittle. Maybe now's not the time. Carl blinked. Just saying. You always are. Carl flushed, chuckled awkwardly, and wandered off toward the grill. The group around Beth and Adam thinned, the way people do when they sense something about to unravel. Beth scanned the yard. Her eyes landed on Donald. He didn't look away. Later, after the sun dipped and the citronella candles sputtered on the picnic tables, Beth found him near the driveway. The wine glass was gone. Her heels clicked against the pavement. Can we talk? Donald didn't answer, but he didn't move either. She stopped beside him. You knew. He waited. The article, she said. Joy Malik, the scholarship. The dates line up. Linda from the Bursar's office confirmed the anonymous donor came through in June. He said nothing. We looked through Adam's posts, the thank you video, the dorm photos. You knew. Donald turned his head slightly. Since I sat in those bleachers. Beth's breath caught. That was May. He nodded. She stepped back, as if the space between them had suddenly become dangerous. You planned this. I executed it. Her hands clenched. You let him thank you. You smiled for the cameras. You posed for pictures knowing full well. Donald turned fully now. He called me the ATM, to my face, in front of that crowd. He's a kid. He's 19, Donald said, old enough to know what he meant. Beth's voice rose. You humiliated him. You humiliated me. No, Donald said evenly. You did that yourselves. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences. Beth looked stricken. You think this makes you noble? No, he said. It makes me done. She stared at him, searching for something. Remorse, anger, softness. But there was only stillness, the kind of stillness that comes after a building's been stripped down to its bones. Do you even care what people are saying? No, he said, but I know what they're seeing. Beth shook her head. You've always been good at building things, but you never learned how to keep them. He let that sit. It wasn't untrue. She turned, heels clicking again, and disappeared into the dusk. That night, the diner buzzed louder than usual. Marta sat in a corner booth, laptop open, recorder between her coffee and slice of pie. Across from her, Elaine leaned in, voice low but insistent. He never bragged, not once, Elaine said. But Beth, she always made it sound like it was her doing. The boy's future, the house, the college plan. Donald just nodded along. Marta typed quickly. I mean, I'm not saying it's right, what he did, but I get it. Marta looked up. You think he meant to hurt them? I think he meant for them to finally see what he's worth. At the counter, Carl sat alone, nursing a third refill. His phone screen glowed, paused on an old group shot from graduation. Adam in the center, arms around both Beth and Donald. The caption had once read, Blessed beyond words. Now it was just a blank space. Back at home, Donald stood in the garage, light buzzing overhead. He reached for the shelf above the workbench and pulled down a small wooden box. Inside were receipts. Old ones. Tuition checks, car repairs, utility bills from years past. He added a new item to the pile, a printed copy of Marta's article. Then he closed the lid and slid the box back into its place. Upstairs, the house was still. No voices, no footsteps. Just the quiet of a structure finally cleared of its illusions. It wasn't peace, but it was honest. Where character pays. The admissions office was quiet that morning, just the low hum of printers and the occasional click of a stapler. Joy stood at the counter, her posture straight, face composed. The woman behind the desk, Linda, smiled as she handed over the final packet. "All set," she said. "Keys, meal card, dorm orientation schedule. And this," she slid over a slim envelope with the college's crest embossed on the flap, "is from the scholarship office, just formal confirmation." Joy nodded, thanked her, and tucked it all into her canvas bag. She didn't linger. Outside, the late summer heat clung to the pavement. She walked across the quad toward the dorms, her steps unhurried but sure. Donald watched from his truck, parked under the shade of a half-dead oak, engine off. The windows were down. He didn't expect a wave or even a glance. Joy hadn't seen him. That was how he wanted it. He'd shown up early, signed a line on a maintenance form so the bursar's office could process an air conditioning repair request, just enough to be useful. Then he'd disappeared again, blending into the background like a man who had spent his life fixing things without needing his name on the plaque. Joy reached the dorm entrance. A student worker held the door open, laughing about something. Joy smiled politely, stepped inside, and was gone. Donald sat for a while longer. The sun climbed. The dorm's brick face shimmered faintly in the heat. He started the engine and drove away. 2 blocks from home, he passed the Walker's house. Beth was on the porch, trimming dead leaves from a potted hydrangea. Adam sat nearby, scrolling through his phone, the glow reflected in his sunglasses. Neither looked up. Donald didn't slow down. He didn't need to. There was nothing left to say. In the days that followed, small things arrived. A typed letter on plain paper. No flourish, no signature beyond J. Malik. It thanked him without sentiment, without apology, for making it possible. She said she wouldn't waste it. He kept the letter folded inside the same wooden box in the garage, not framed, not displayed, just kept. Twice that month, professors from the college sent short notes. One mentioned Joy's questions in class, her clarity of thought. Another said she'd offered to tutor a fellow student who was struggling. Donald read them once, then filed them away. Tom came by on a Saturday, brought over a box of nails and a 6-pack like old times. They didn't talk about the Walkers or the article or the neighbors who had stopped waving. Tom stood by the workbench, cracking open a bottle. "She doing okay?" he asked. Donald nodded. "Yeah, seems so." They worked in silence for a while, fixing the back gate that had started to sag. When they were done, Tom leaned against the fence, wiping his hands on a rag. "You know," he said, "you could have just let it go." Donald looked at the repaired hinge. "I did," he said, "just not the way people expected." Tom gave a dry chuckle. "You always were a stubborn bastard." Donald didn't argue. Later, as the sun dipped low, Tom stood by his truck. "You sure this is how you want to leave it?" Donald looked toward the street, where the houses lined up like paper cutouts. Neat, hollow, identical from a distance. "I didn't burn anything down," he said. "I just stopped holding up what wasn't mine to carry." Tom hesitated, then nodded once. "All right." He climbed into the truck. "You ever need anything?" "I know." The truck pulled away. Over the next weeks, the neighborhood settled into its new rhythm. Some folks nodded politely. Others crossed the street. Marta's article had made its rounds. The words "anonymous benefactor" turned into something else when whispered over fences. Beth still held her head high at the grocery store, but her smiles were tighter now. Adam stopped posting for a while. When he came back, the captions were more cautious, the filters less glossy. Donald didn't gloat. He mowed his lawn, paid his bills, fixed what broke. The quiet suited him. One morning, he opened the mailbox and found a flyer from the college. Fall fundraiser. Pictures of smiling students, including one of Joy, standing beside a whiteboard covered in equations. He looked at it for a long time before placing it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a wrench. Not pride, not exactly, but something like it. At night, the house still echoed more than it used to. He didn't fill the silence with music or noise, just let it be. Some things, once stripped down to the studs, didn't need rebuilding. They just needed to stand honest.